All right. Well, thank you so much for coming out this morning to participate in a dialogue about accessory dwelling units. I am really thrilled by the interest in this topic. And I'm Hans Riemer. I'm one of your 4 at-large council members, so I represent the whole county. And I am chair of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. So we handle master plans and zoning changes and things like that at the committee, and we make recommendations to the full council. And I live in Tacoma Park, and I live in a house that was once chopped up for accessory dwelling units and then was sort of purged in the great purge of accessory dwelling units in Tacoma Park that happened about 25 years ago or something like that. But there's still 2 gas meters in the basement. And when we moved in, we had to sort of undo some of that stuff to turn it back into a single-family dwelling unit. But our whole block was actually accessory dwelling units, as I've heard. And it's interesting. In the post-war period, that was the solution. You know, there wasn't enough housing. People moved in. They rented rooms. They built accessory dwelling units. They did what they had to do to provide housing. And that kind of changed in the years after that. But I'm really excited about this discussion today. I want to make a few introductions. First of all, my team is here. Ken and Tommy and Jason, and I hope you've met everybody. And we're going to get a presentation from Lisa Giovanni here, who is with the planning department, and she's one of the county's real resources treasurers on housing policy, and she's always helping us understand issues of course, at the commission, at the council. And Pamela Dunn is here. She's just joined the council staff, and she is coming to us from the planning staff, and she will be helping us work on master plans and zonings. And Casey Anderson is here, our chairman of our planning board, who makes a lot of relevant decisions on these topics. So buttonhole Casey, if you haven't already, and talk to him about the topics that you're interested in. I see Jason is here. If you're from the planning team, is it Ellen? Yes, raise your hand if you're from planning. Great. So we have a couple more planning folks. Great, thank you. And Linda McMillan is here, our council policy expert on housing issues in general. And Linda works very closely with us at the committee. So after Lisa gives a presentation about accessory dwelling units and the missing middle housing type, then I'm going to talk a bit about the zoning change that I'm proposing. Side note, if you need to use the restroom during this discussion, this floor's restrooms are out of commission due to renovation on the floor, so you'll need to go downstairs or upstairs. So after Lisa speaks, I'm going to walk through a bit more about what I've proposed, and then we're going to hear from John Poxtis with Habitat for Humanity. And Habitat has an accessory dwelling unit affordable housing program that they have implemented around the country, and then it's a model they'd like to bring to Montgomery County, but they need some zoning fixes in order to be able to do that. And we're going to hear from Eric Saul, who is an architect and a small builder who I got to know through Little League and coaching. My kids are here somewhere. My 2 sons they'll probably come out at an inconvenient moment during this discussion. But in any event, I got to know Eric, and he was helping me realize that the existing code was having a real impact, and he'll talk a bit about that. So after we do our 4 presentations, which are, the first 2 will be a little longer, and the second 2 will be a little shorter, then we'll come to you for your statements, your questions, your comments, your inquiries, and we'll have some mics, and we'll kind of work the floor. We've got the room until 12. We don't have to go that long. It's really going to be up to you and how much continuing conversation you want to have. Again, I'm really excited about this issue. I think the county has a housing crunch, and I think it's creating an affordability crunch. The cost of housing is the biggest component of the cost of living. And, the ability of people to get an affordable place to live in this county has just gotten to the point where, as I think about my 2 boys who are, here, I wonder, are they going to be able to afford to live anywhere near employment, in Montgomery County if they are fortunate enough to, find that their career vision matches what the employment opportunities are in this region. And as a parent, I selfishly want nothing more than my kids to be, kind of under my elbow. And I just wonder, what's it going to take for them to be able to live in, say, Silver Spring or or Bethesda or Tacoma Park. When I was younger, Tacoma Park was the kind of the starter house community. People would move out of Washington and they'd get a small house in Tacoma Park, and they'd start their life in Montgomery County, or of course other parts of the county. But many of my own social friends did that, and that's kind of gone. That resource, that affordable house type, is pretty much gone, and it is available in other parts of the county, but places near Metro, it has really just kind of vanished, and I think that's a real challenge for us. So that was one of the issues that kind of got me thinking about the topic. But I remember growing up, my baseball coach, he and his wife, their son lived in a backyard cottage in the backyard. And I didn't think too much of it. I thought it was pretty cool, actually. But I was surprised to find the limitations on backyard cottages that we have in our code. And you've heard about the tiny house movement. It's something that's kind of trendy, but it's very real. And it's been really a powerful experience for me to hear from many of you residents who have a specific vision for how you might want to use an accessory dwelling unit, how it might fit into your life. And I think the idea that has really given this some stick, some glue, is the idea of families and different generations in families wanting to find a way to live close to one another, where they're independent and yet they're close at the same time. And the idea that the zoning code would be a barrier to, a very meaningful way of life, to me is very problematic. So that's been another part of the learning process for me, is just hearing about that. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Lisa Giovanni to come and share her presentation, and then I will again talk a little bit about the proposal, and then we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Gavoni, and I'm the housing planner for the Montgomery County Planning Department, and I'm going to go over a brief overview of how ADUs work now. So an accessory dwelling unit is a second dwelling unit that's subordinate to the principal dwelling on the property. An ADU can be in the same house. It can be an addition or in a basement, but it can also be detached and another separate structure on the same property. One of the things about ADUs is it must not only be compliant with Chapter 59, the zoning code, but must also be compliant with Chapter 26, which basically states how many people per square foot you can have in a dwelling unit, and also Chapter 29, landlord-tenant relations. So the existing conditions. So since about 2013, which is when we had the last huge overhaul for accessory dwelling units, we've had about 239 total ADU applications through the process, which we average about 30 to 40 a year for, which is a pretty small amount when you consider the fact that we have over 1 million in our population. One of the other things is before 2013, we only averaged about 10 ADU applications a year for being licensed, but so that while this is an increase, it's still a pretty small and meager amount. So why are ADUs important? First and foremost, they can help increase the supply of housing in our county. They also tend to be more affordable. The land cost is already baked in, since there's already a principal dwelling. And they can also provide supplemental income to homeowners. So one of the things is about 20% of homeowners in Montgomery County are cost burden, meaning they spend about 35% of their income on their mortgage. And the other thing is it can help meet the needs of the county's growing senior demographic. By 2040, we expect that the senior population in Montgomery County is going to increase by 40%. I'm part of the Research and Special Projects Division, and we just undertook a study of older adult housing. And one of the things we found is about 7 out of 10 Montgomery County seniors would like to age in place. And age in place either means their own house or in their same community. And accessory dwelling units are a great way to meet that need. So I'm going to talk a little bit about timeline, about how we got here. And one of the things I want to emphasize is it's been really incremental. Before 2013, all ADUs were reviewed under what was called a special exception, which is now called the conditional use process. And that basically required that it had planning staff review, but it also had to go to the hearing examiner. And then 2012, a new ZTA was introduced that made ADUs no longer a special exception or a conditional use. They basically said, You're allowed to do it by right in these certain zones, by right meaning you can just go get your building permit as long as you meet these limited conditions, mainly parking and spacing, which we'll get into. And then the next DTA, which was introduced last year and was effective in October, that said that if you did not meet these the parking and spacing requirements, you could get a waiver from the hearing examiner instead of going through the entire special exception conditional use process. And we'll go over what the waiver process is now. And that's where we are now with Councilmember Riemer introducing this new ZTA, which will generally amend the provisions for accessory dwelling unit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the current use standards for attached. You see this chart here, and the L basically means that it's a limited use in these zones. And so most of the residential detached zones, it's a limited use, meaning it has to meet certain conditions in order to be allowed. One of the conditions is spacing. So depending on the zone that you're in, you either need to be 300 or 500 feet away from another accessory dwelling unit. Okay, sorry. I'm moving the mic with me. All right, next slide. And the next one is for detached. Detached, one of the conditions of that is it needs to be a minimum of 1 acre for a lot, which really takes out a lot of down county because we don't have a lot of 1 acre lots. There also must be no other approved detached accessory dwellings within 500 feet in these zones, and it's also not permitted in the R200, R90, R60 zones. So going through the current use standards, which is some of the other rules for accessory dwelling units, is the property must be the owner's primary address. The house must be at least 5 years. The ADU must have the same street address as the primary dwelling. And the ADU must be internal to the main dwelling if it's on a site 1 acre or less. And that requires a complete separation of units. And what that basically means is that we need separate entrances. You can't enter through the main and then go down the stairs to the basement to the ADU. And only 1 ADU may be created on each lot, and ADUs are permitted in townhouses. And the total number of occupants is limited by Chapter 26, which is what I mentioned earlier, that it says the number of people per square feet. And the total number of occupants residing in the ADU who are 18 years older is limited to 2. So the size. This is one of the hurdles that we heard in creating an ADU, is that ADUs must be 50% of the total floor area of the principal dwelling, or 1,200 square feet, whichever is less. And the maximum total floor area for an addition is about 800 square feet. So if you add on, you can only have an ADU about 800 square feet. And for parking, if there's an existing driveway, 1 on-site parking space is required in addition to any required spot. So for principal dwellings, we usually require 2 spots. So that means that you would need another one. However, if you do not meet the parking requirement, you can request a waiver from the hearing examiner to allow an accessory dwelling unit, even if you do not meet that requirement. And so a little bit about that waiver process that I mentioned earlier. So the waiver process, if you do not meet the 300 or 500 spacing requirement or the having a spot for your ADU in terms of parking, you can go to the hearing examiner and request a waiver. Now, what the waiver process does as compared to the hearing examiner normal process, it really cuts the time in half. So within 30 days of your application being rejected by DHCA, you have a hearing that you can have, and then they issue their finding within 30 days. So it basically takes it from about a 4 to 5 months process down to a 2-month process. So it really does cut it in half. So one thing I want to talk a little bit about is how other jurisdictions and how Montgomery County's ADU policies compare to other jurisdictions that are neighboring us. So the first we looked at is Washington, D.C., which is our neighbor, and they had zoning amendments that went into effect in 2016. They're similar to Montgomery County. D.C. allows attached or accessory dwelling units by right in many of their residential zones, and they have an owner-occupied PC requirement, similar to how we do, and no more than 3 people can live in their ADUs. They also have, one of the things that's different is they require no parking space for their ADU. And they have a pre-permitting consultation with their Department of Housing and Community Affairs, which basically looks at their application and says what is wrong with it and allows it to either move forward or they're required to make changes. And the building permit process for ADUs in DC typically takes between 2 to 6 months, which is comparable to our process. Arlington, Virginia, they also recently updated their ADU policy from 2009 to 2017. They only had 20 ADUs in the entire county. So they really looked at it in terms of when they updated their Arlington County housing master plan and said, you know, we need to fix this. So they also have a max occupancy of 3 persons, similar to DC's, and they have a little bit smaller of a size, where the max size is 750 square feet, or 35% of the combined area. They have no annual limit on the amount of ADUs, which means they don't have a spacing requirement there. And their parking varies by zone. But one of the things about Arlington County's parking is if they don't meet the parking requirement for an ADU, they're allowed to do a parking study that basically says if the neighborhood is underutilized at at 65%, that they are allowed to go forward with their ADU. And their application is reviewed by their planning staff in Arlington County. So some of the big hurdles that we've heard from accessory dwelling units working at the planning department, and first and foremost, is cost. An internal accessory dwelling unit is upwards to $15,000 to $20,000. A detached accessory dwelling unit could be over $100,000. And that's quite a lot of money, and there's not a lot of financing options for accessory dwelling units. The other thing is the 1 unit minimum for detached accessory dwelling units really takes out a lot of the down county. This is the area that we would want to see accessory dwelling units that are, you know, close to transit and close to a lot of amenities. There's just not a lot of room for ADUs there. The other complaint that we heard is parking. Their idea of, you know, they don't have the extra spot in the down county, and they don't want to go through the conditional use process. And spacing. If you have another accessory dwelling unit on your block, you can't do an accessory dwelling unit, which really prohibits a lot of, you know, from a lot of applications from moving forward. And last and not least is the size requirements. One of the things about accessory dwelling units is that they're measured from the outside. So if you have that 1,200 foot maximum, square foot maximum, if you have a furnace in your basement, even if you have non-livable space, because the requirement is measured from the outside, it really limits the amount of accessory dwelling units that can come forward. I think that's it, but I'll be around later if anyone should have any questions.
Right. Thank you, Lisa. All right. I've been asked to stand up here for the benefit of the streaming, so our next speakers will ask you to come to the podium here. So Lisa did an excellent job talking about the current provisions and some of the barriers as well. So I'm going to maybe reprise a bit of that and then talk about what I have recommended. I want to just really thank John Paxtis from Habitat for Humanity. This maybe last spring, he gave me a book called Backdoor Revolution. And it was written by a person from Portland, Oregon, who had been part of changing their policies and procedures in Portland, which resulted in a real, you know, flowering of accessory dwelling units in Portland. And one of the things we learned was that, you know, there are communities like Portland where they produce 500 units of these a year. Just as an example, we heard some very bad news this week that in all of 2018, there were only 800 housing units added to the tax rolls of Montgomery County. Only 800 units added, a county of 1 million people. That is how you get a housing crunch, my friends. That is how you get an affordability crisis. So what if we could generate, you know, a few hundred accessory dwelling units every year? That would be a pretty significant contribution to our housing, you know, supply, and you know, that would be helpful. So let's proceed with this presentation. So Lisa has talked about some of the current restrictions. You know, these are restrictions that are in the code today, and you know, the property has to be owner occupied. Some of these I'm going to keep, or I'm recommending that we keep. So I wanted to put them all up here so we could get a sense of kind of the contrast. But you know, you have to provide notice to your neighbors. You can only have 2 adults in the accessory dwelling unit. You have to have 3 off-street parking spaces. You know, single lot, a detached has to be on an acre who has an acre, you know, in down county, who has an acre and needs to do an ADU, right? Um, you know, you have to follow all the existing rules for the single family house. So you can't build it bigger than you could build a house. You can't put it closer to your neighbor's property than you could put your house. You can't cover more of your property than you could if you're just building a house. This is a really important concept I just want to emphasize because we don't change this. You know, just because you can put an accessory dwelling unit doesn't mean you can build bigger than you could build otherwise. And that's important as far as impervious surface and tree protection and other issues. They have to be separated, separate entrance. Someone asked me earlier about what's the difference between an accessory unit and renting a room in my house. That's an important distinction. I think a lot of people think that what we're talking about is people renting out rooms in houses, which is a great housing solution and was once much more culturally accepted than it has been for the last 30, 40 years. And I frankly think that that has got to be part of the solution, is changing that attitude towards renting out rooms in houses and living in that way. But a lot of times what you hear from people is sort of you know, they think that we're just talking about having a lot of people living in a house. We're talking about creating a separate house. And that separate house is either inside the house or it's detached outside the house. But it's got to have a kitchen, it's got to have a bathroom, and it's got to have a separate entrance. If you've done a kitchen renovation, you know that's not cheap, right? It's an expensive proposition. Lisa mentioned it's more than $100,000 if it's outside the house. It's like $140,000, $150,000, it could be $180,000 to build a detached house, to convert a garage into a really nice unit, to build one from scratch in the lot if you have the room. So we're not talking about something that, you know, there aren't a lot of shortcuts to building a kitchen to code or building a bathroom to code. We're talking about good quality housing. That's what we're going for. Unfortunately, there are many people who have sort of an anti-renter bias. And when we talk about this issue, they just have this vision in their mind of what they don't like about people renting the homes that we live in single-family neighborhoods. And that is just an unfortunate bias against renting that, you know, frankly doesn't really have a place in our community. But that is a challenge. So continuing, the unit has to be separate. It's expensive. So how do you build one? Well, you know, if you have room in your equity of your house, you might take a home equity line of credit, you know, to pay for it. If you don't have room, then, you know, you're gonna have to figure out how to removing restrictions is exciting and it's great, and that's what we want. And for some of us, you know, keeping restrictions is exciting and great, and that's what we want. So I'm trying to explain that there's something here for everybody. So the property has to be owner occupied. That means you can't buy the house with the accessory unit and then rent them both out, right? You got to live in one of the two units. You do have to provide notice to your neighbors. Not more than 2 adults can live in the accessory dwelling unit. Now that gets to some of the kind of concerns. Oh, you're going to have 10 people moving. There's 10 people. Well, the code is there's not more than 2 adults that can reside in the unit. You have to have 2 off-street parking spaces. Now, 2 off-street parking spaces is the existing code for single-family dwelling houses. So what we're saying is you don't have to build another one if you add an accessory dwelling unit and you have 2 spaces already. If you have a house in most of the county, you've got two off-street already. If you can't build another spot, and do we, on a street where there's not really a parking issue, is it smart to make people pave over more of their yard to create more impervious surface when parking on the street is viable? I think that's something that really is problematic. So you can request a waiver, and then there's a process to identify whether there's sufficient parking to park on the street. Have to follow all the rules. I mentioned that already. The unit has to be separate entrance. They're separate from one another. Only one per property. We delete the restriction that it can't be within 300 feet of another one. We delete the size restriction. We maintain the 50% requirement, but that, in any event, is sort of irrelevant with the size restriction gone. Allow it to be with new construction. There's no more distance requirement, but you can apply for a waiver from parking restrictions. Neighbors can contest, and it has to be inspected and licensed, and there can be no short-term rental. This is one we really grappled with, and we'll be interested to hear what people say. It is true that if you can do a short-term rental with the unit, it's easier to explain to the bank why this will generate income and why they should loan you money at a good rate, because there's sort of more of a guaranteed market. Today, good luck getting a loan from the bank if they can't even determine that you'll be able to do a unit in the first place. But we decided that it just really what we're going for here is we're going for housing for people who want to live in the community. We're not going for, a commercial enterprise. And of course, homeowners associations may have additional restrictions. So that is just the existing framework of housing in Montgomery County, that HOAs can adopt their own rules that are stricter than the county. And so, that continues to exist. So in your handouts, you have this sheet, which includes the zoning change itself. Is there a next slide? I think there is. So the next step in the process is we're going to have a public hearing on Tuesday, February 26th at 7:30 p.m. So at a public hearing, it's open to anyone to sign up and testify. You get 3 minutes, and you can sign up now because the CTA has been introduced, so you can go to the County Council website and sign up to testify. And it's everyone and anyone is invited to testify. You'll provide written testimony, and then you'll either speak from, just speak, or you'll read that. So that's coming up on the 26th, and we encourage everyone to participate in that. And if you can't attend, email the council. Let the council know your views on the issue, and that's the county.council email address, county.council@montgomerycountymd. And if you have something you'd like me to answer, here's my contact information, Councilmember Riemer, and our phone number. And that is on the sheet, I believe, as well. So the zoning change has been introduced, the public hearing. So after the public hearing, it will come to the committee. The committee will deliberate on it. If you have changes you recommend that we make, we'll consider changes, and then we'll send that to the full council, and then the full council will deliberate on that. So we've got months ahead of us of deliberation and plenty of time for consideration of any suggestions that people may have. All right, so with that, I'd like to go now to Eric Saul, who is a architect, and again, as I mentioned, kind of helped me understand that there were issues affecting real people. And thank you, Eric, for taking some time to be here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Hans, for inviting me. Thanks, Hans, for inviting me. My name is Eric Saul. I work for myself. I'm a self-employed architect in Tacoma Park. And I would say probably 10 to 15 projects a year come my way to our small firm where someone wants to build an ADU or a basement apartment in their house. And I have the bad news, or I have the burden of telling them the bad news of saying, sorry, you can't do that. And it obviously it's bad for them because they just bought a house in Montgomery County, spent $600,000, $700,000 on it. They're already closed, and then they come to me and now they can't build it. It hurts my company because turning away those kind of jobs, turning away that kind of work is, probably adds up to one full job, one full-time employee, not to mention the countless construction jobs that could be built in the process of building a dozen of these things. Hold on, I lost my train of thought here. In one instance, a client came to me just looking for a house. I do that often where someone's trying to, before they buy a house, they want me to assess it, tell them what they can and can't do. That's a pretty standard process. And I've had to tell them, look, the neighbor next door has one within 300 feet, or you got to check these things, or you don't have an off-street parking that works for you, or several requirements that we've talked about earlier. And what they do is they go to the DC border and they find a house over there and they purchase on that side. So there's another lost opportunity for Montgomery County to sell a home, or a homeowner here to sell their home. Anyway, it's really frustrating, and it loses work for us, and it loses our revenue. So clearly there's good things about making it easier to build ADUs here. And I think in regards to policy, that'll be, Hans will talk about that more, and other people. But I'm here to talk about just my perspective as an architect and a small business owner, and what homeowners are going through. So the off-street parking is a big one because I live in Tacoma Park and it's very hilly. We don't have flat roads. We have, lots of hills, and there's just whole streets where there's no driveways on them. And some of the parking requirements can be the biggest obstacles. Also, they'll tell you, well, if you want an ADU, you have to build a driveway. Well, when you build a driveway for one car, you actually lose a parking space on the street. So you're not gaining a parking space. You're just trading it that could be on the street onto your property. There's usually trees around. So street trees are protected in Tacoma Park and much of the county with new tree laws. So there's often tree-lined streets, and it's hard to fit in that driveway. There's other things going on the streets. There's fire hydrants and whatnot. So it really makes it tough to meet that parking requirement. And there's a need for detached units, not just basement apartments. A lot of these homes here are older, and the basements don't have 7 feet of head height, which is code. You have like a 6'10" basement height, or you don't have a separate entrance. So digging that out, digging down a foot to build a ADU in your basement is really expensive. We're talking $40,000 to underpin your house and dig down another foot so you can meet that height requirement. That's going to make the cost of your basement apartment probably $100,000 by the time you add the kitchen and the bathroom and all that work. Basements are also, as you guys know, this fall we had a lot of rain. How many people in this room had a basement flood? Mine did. It's not really safe for someone to live in your basement all the time, especially in an older home. Sometimes it's easier just to build a detached unit above grade in your backyard. It would help that out. Also, being in your basement, you have to fire rate the floor. You have to make sure there's enough light coming in. If your basement's too low to the ground, you want a nice environment for your tenant, and looking out the window, you don't want to see just like a window well, a metal window well that's egress compliant, but it's really just not attractive. So the detached requirement would be really helpful. I think it's safer. You can make it ADA compliant. A basement is really hard to convert into an ADA compliant unit. First of all, you got to go down the stairs to get to it. So you can do it above ground, have level with the ground, have ramps, whatever you need. So an elderly person could also rent your ADU. There's more design flexibility, size difference. You know, you can make a little mini two-story unit, like a loft space. A basement's pretty limited. And it's just nicer for the person living there. So with that being said, that's pretty much my presentation. I didn't want to talk too much about it, but I just want to talk about those factors that we as architects struggle with the current codes. And I hope that we could change it to create the option to either have a basement apartment or have a detached unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. All right, John. John is with Habitat for Humanity, and John really helped me see the light here. So, John?
Thank you, Hans. Better hold it? Okay. All right, good morning. My name is John Poxtis, and I have the privilege of being the president and CEO of Habitat for Humanity, Metro Maryland. Thank you. So Habitat for Humanity is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation that was formed in Maryland in 1982 for the purposes of creating decent, affordable homeownership opportunities in Montgomery and Prince George's County. It is our belief that Habitat is in a unique position to help solve the affordable housing crisis by building accessory apartments, or ADUs, also known as accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. We are licensed general contractors with over 37 years of experience building single-family homes, townhouses, rehabilitating distressed foreclosed properties. Our repair and weatherization program in the county has helped hundreds of owner-occupied homeowners, including older adults, veterans, improve the quality of their life and reduce energy bills. Habitat is blessed with the support of the business community, faith organizations, and nearly 4,500 volunteers each year who are ready, willing, and able to make a difference in our community. Habitat for Humanity strongly supports the legislation that was introduced that will reduce barriers to a low-cost means of adding to the housing of supply and by building accessory units, ADUs. Habitat is particularly interested in serving residents with lower household incomes, including older adults, veterans, adults with disabilities, and children with disabilities. Habitat believes there are numerous environmental, social, and economic benefits to the increased development of accessory apartments. Let me just go through a few of these. So, environmental benefits. ADUs create housing that is relatively small environmental footprint. They reduce energy use for heating and cooling, which account for the majority of the energy used in the life cycle of a building. They tend to be built where there is an active market for demand for rental housing in residential zones. These neighborhoods tend to be where residents can choose to walk, bike, or use public transportation. Permanent accessory apartments should reduce the number of illegal accessory apartments that are often unsafe and do not meet code requirements. We move to the social benefits. ADUs provide 1 or 2 bedroom housing units in residential zones which are generally in short supply relative to demand. They provide more affordable housing options in residential neighborhoods without dramatically changing the neighborhood's character. They provide a unique configuration of housing for multi-generational households, including older adults, veterans, millennials, and newly married couples. They create spaces for groups and individuals to live in close proximity and to share with one another, but maintain their own distinct private living quarters. They enable active older adults nearing retirement to find a viable option to downsize, control costs, and remain in a familiar neighborhood. Some of the economic benefits. Accessory apartments, or ADUs, utilize existing governmental infrastructure, including roads, water, and sewer connections. They generally create housing near employment, retail centers, and transit corridors. They generate jobs for the construction industry. They generate more tax revenue and tax income for the county, taxable income for the county. They are wealth-building opportunity for homeowners by providing a stream of rental income. So I have an example here of what Habitat is interested in doing and making an impact in the county. One of Habitat's objectives is to help low-income homeowning seniors age in place. We heard aging in place as a goal earlier by building an ADU on their property and upgrading the original home. The homeowner would then have the option of living in the primary residence or the ADU. Many seniors on fixed income cannot afford to keep the family home. Habitat for Humanity would offer a way for seniors to partner with affordable rental program that can help bring in stabilizing income. Low-income seniors do not qualify for generally do not qualify for traditional financing. A home sale or unfavorable reverse mortgage are often their only option. The sale requires them to leave the home. The reverse mortgage surrenders the equity they built up over a lifetime. Many seniors own post-World War II homes originally designed to house larger families. With the children now grown, these larger, older homes present a challenging maintenance and upkeep burdens to seniors as they age. Accessibility also becomes an issue. Much of the home value can be realized and secured by building an accessory dwelling unit on a property and by upgrading the existing home. With rental income from either the main house or the accessory dwelling unit, the senior can afford to maintain that property, remain on the property. For many, keeping the connection to their neighborhood, friends, and local support networks is of critical importance, and I meet people like this all the time. With an ADU, seniors can downsize to a new ADU and energy-efficient home. Either the main home or the accessory apartment can be rented for additional income. And any additional income can allow the senior to age in place. So that's an example of what we would be interested in doing. I just want to mention that there was some work done by the Women in Data Science at Booz Allen Hamilton that they did what they call a hackathon, which is a deep analytical review of how it would impact millennials, seniors, and veterans. And this document is available on the information table if you're interested in seeing it. So I'm going to stop my comments there, and I'll be around to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to ask John and Lisa and Eric to join us up here. And now we're going to hear from you. So I've got Jason on this side of the room and Ken on that side of the room. And they each have a microphone. And they're going to, I'm going to just call people, and they're going to walk around. And they're going to keep possession of that mic. Hope you'll understand. But that's something we've learned the hard way. But in any event, so please show your hand, and Jason, you guys can pick on your sides. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Bonnie, and I'm currently going through looking at, I live with my family, my son and his family, in their mostly finished basement. And I think that our situation is going to comply with all of the new rules. But what if a neighbor says, "Oh, we don't like you because you've got a dog and you walk on our lawn, and we're going to object"? What do you do then in that case, if you fully comply with everything else? Okay, well, I don't think they can object if you comply. But let me,
if they're, what do you think they would be objecting to if you comply?
I'm making it up because
Yeah.
I've got great
You're
relationships with my
basically
neighbors.
concerned that they would
Just say no.
spuriously complain, but if you comply, then you live there as a matter of right, and there's nothing they can do about that, and they cannot harass you. And if they do, then you know. Absolutely. Did I answer that effectively? They can't challenge. Thank you, Richard. They can't challenge. I mean, they can challenge the license because you have to have a license to live in an ADU or to rent an ADU, not to live there, to rent it. If it's your son doesn't need to have a license to live, you know, in your house, although you might wish that he did. So if you rent it, if it's actually a rental, now it sounds like in your case it may not be.
I take care of the baby in the morning.
You take care of you pay your dues. You take care of the baby. So in your case, there's no actual license because you're not renting it. Is that right, Linda? Did I get that right? I may not get some of these things right, folks. That's why I'm going to turn to Linda McMillan, our policy professional.
If there's a full apartment that's built out, then you do need to.
You'll need a license regardless. So even if it's your family
unless
member.
Unless it's a registered living unit for a relative. I mean, there are some different things.
Okay.
But
so I was wrong about that.
Right. So it's a little different than in your other example of you're renting a room and
Right.
sharing a kitchen. Once you have separate, like a fully separate unit, then there
Right.
are some compliance issues.
Okay.
But the license really, when the notice goes up, there are only some specific things that can be taken to the hearing examiner, like a concern about parking or the proximity to another ADU. It's very, very limited. So it's
Right.
not just like, I don't like it.
Right. They can't challenge your license for any reason. There's only very specific ways that they can challenge a
Yes.
license.
And that would occur before you are issued the license.
Right.
And so then once you're issued the license, assuming you are continuing to comply with the terms of like who you can rent to and the number of people, then you would be fine.
Thank you.
And all of this, what you can object to is on the hearing examiner's website. And so you can kind of see you can't object also on HOA grounds. So that is something that the hearing examiner will not hear a complaint about.
Did you say you cannot
You cannot.
object on HOA grounds?
Correct. That's through your housing association, not through the hearing examiner.
Does that make sense? What she said was that if you have a dispute with your HOA, you take that to your HOA. You don't take that to the county. Okay? Ken.
Hi there. I'm with the City of Tacoma Park. I'm the rental licensing specialist, so this is a near and dear to my heart conversation that we're having. Thank you for all the comments about parking in Tacoma Park. That's my big one. But the gentleman from Habitat for Humanity just mentioned something that I wanted to ask about. Currently, if you have an accessory dwelling, the owner has to live in the larger portion of the house and only rent the smaller accessory. Is that something that's going to change, or is that still the case where
Yes.
the owner needs to be in the big part?
That will change. The owner has to live in one of them. Because one of the things that we did with this one is we said, basically, by getting rid of the size cap, you can build, theoretically, you could build a unit that's 49% as large as, it's 49% of the property. And then, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, the owner has to live in one of them. Doesn't have to live in the bigger one.
Are we coming this way or are we going that way?
Oh, I'm sorry. You got the mic, so go ahead.
Great. Thank
And
you.
then we'll go this way.
So I just had a couple points. I'm a citizen in Tacoma Park. We are a young family, and the first point I want to make that I don't think anybody has made yet is that ADUs help young families like ours afford houses in this market.
Yes.
Right? The ability to rent out space in your home or have an ADU makes it so that you can afford the mortgage or go reinvest that money that you aren't spending on your mortgage in your community on other small businesses. So I think that's the first point. The second point I want to make is that I appreciate what you are doing, and it's a positive first step, but more can be done. In Tacoma Park, most of the homes are very old, right? And as has already been identified, right? The basement height in these older homes
Yeah.
is maybe 6'6", 6'8", 6'9". That's still perfectly comfortable for people to live in. And there should be different standards for older homes that make it so that older homes have a different standard so that you don't have to spend $40, $50, $60,000 to dig out your basement,
Right.
so that people can live in it. The question that should always be answered is it habitable? Is it safe? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then there should be an ADU allowed. That's all you guys should be looking for. So on that same point, right, the checklist, there's things in there that make little to no sense from a habitable or a safety point, like a 30-inch stove. Why do you need a 30-inch stove in an ADU? If you have a 24-inch stove that's perfectly workable, safe and new, why won't that suffice?
Great
The last-
observations. Keep going. We're taking notes here. Just for everyone, we're taking notes. But Linda McMillan on our staff is keeping track of everyone's suggestions and additions.
The last point I'd like to make is that the checklist is not always consistent with what's in the county regulations. As an example, the county regulations say provide a floor area for ceiling height. I think it's like 60% have to be an average height. This provides hard and fast standards for ceiling height in a basement. So that's a discrepancy you guys might want to look at and clear up as part of this process as well.
Awesome. Thank you for those comments. If anyone wants to add to that, no? All right. This side.
Yes, I'm Janet Johnson, and I
Janet.
live on Janet Road in Silver Spring. I live in an older housing area. My house was built in 1947. I live on a street that is 1.5 blocks long, and it was Class A residential, which meant a single-family dwelling with one non-related adult. That was the county code when I purchased my house. And everybody lived that way in 1999. Today, my house next door has 10 cars for its street. We have 7 more next door, 6 across the street, and they're all exactly the same as my house. I live in one of those divisions where if you come home drunk, you're not going to know what door is yours. Okay? They are an endless street of Cape Cods. My problem here, I think having accessory apartments is a wonderful thing. If they're owner occupied, which on my street only 20% are, and the county does not enforce the code. They don't enforce the egress code. The house next door to mine has no egress. They have one exit door. Egress is defined as 5 square feet of glass on opposing walls in a residence, correct? County? That is, I have the county code here.
I'm sure you're right if you're reading from the code.
And no more than 44 inches above the floor to the window height. That's the glass height, not the sill. And it must open so a human can get out the window. That's for fire code requirements. Not one house on my street meets this requirement. The county council, I called Mr. Riemer, I've called Ms. Navarro, I've called the planning board, I've called the housing board. They sent one inspector out in 19 years.
Okay.
He made one violation call. One. Our street today is nearly impassable. I got this note on my car a week ago. Don't park in front of my house. I don't park in front of yours. Last night I came home from a 5-day business trip and a person was parked in my car, in my driveway. Not my car. In the last 6 years, I have called the county police department 17 times to have someone ticketed and towed or removed or notified for parking in my driveway.
Okay.
I've had 1 ticket issued.
Okay.
If you're going, I'm all for the housing.
Yep.
The county's lack of response,
Yep.
I'm not in favor of.
I hear you. I think you are speaking for many people who feel overwhelmed by the conditions of their neighborhood. We hear that. And what I can say to your benefit is last year, the county council added significant funds for housing code inspectors, and we are ramping up our staff to provide housing code inspection. And you know, if you'll contact my office again, we'll be glad to encourage the code inspectors to get back to your neighborhood. I was just conferring with Linda McMillan about this topic. The current code for houses, just with setting aside accessory dwelling units, is as long as everyone is related, there's no limit on the number of people who can live, because there's no limit on the size of your family. We don't say you can't have a family of a certain size. Many people feel that that is something that is abused, but that is the law, is that you can, as many people can live in a house as our family. The accessory dwelling provision is quite different. Accessory dwelling provision says 2 adults, not more than 2 adults, even if they're family, not more than 2 adults. Thank you. So we hear you. And okay, next. Go. You're on that side, so.
Thanks, Hans, for hosting this. And
I want to ask everyone to keep the mic close to your mouth, please.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for hosting this. I'm a retired firefighter for the county with 25 years of service, so I have a professional experience with housing issues and crowded streets and so on, as well as a personal experience in living in Bethesda on a firefighter's income. I turned 63 yesterday, and I hope to stay in Bethesda, but it's expensive. So at 65, I lose over $1,000 in income from my pension due to the county's efforts to, well, not to integrate, but to save money on the county side. And
you say integrate, I say.
we used to have a 3-legged stool in the expectation for people living a full life in the community, and that was the owning the house and having it already paid, and having Social Security and having a pension. Anyway, in a few years, I'll start to lose income, and that may make me force me to make a housing choice to change locations. Professionally, I see, I've driven fire trucks and ambulances on all kinds of streets, including very narrow streets and very crowded streets. And I've been in all kinds of homes with accessory apartment units or with many people of one family. So I see the need. I see seniors who have fallen and can't get up, and they've been on the floor for 2 or 3 days. And their children live far away. They don't live in the neighborhood to come and check on them. So I always wonder what could have resolved this problem without calling the fire department. So I see that that ADUs have a personal benefit in my life, and one that can build social capital, and that do not stress or crowd neighborhoods, but they actually enliven them. Over my career in the fire department as a homeowner here, I've had to have renters in my house, and it was my plan to afford to live in Bethesda. The only way I can do it is to share my house with strangers. So I have a renter, not in an ADU, but in the common area of the house. That's the only way I can afford to live in Bethesda. And one of the renters, and many of the renters that I've had over the years, some of them have been PhDs, the current one is, and some of them have been contractors and handymen. And they are always called upon for little jobs that can't be done for people around the neighborhood. My house and my neighbor's house, who is a self-employed contractor from Columbia, doesn't speak English well, but is very, very bright. We are the go-to people in the neighborhood if you need something. And so this is a way of building social capital and maximizing revenue for the county and making the distribution of social services more effective. But most importantly, it is aspirational. And So that's why I'm really excited about this. This is not about affordable housing. That's kind of a term that has kind of a pejorative tint to it. This is aspirational. This is the way I want to live. I want to live and come across people of different walks of life, informally every day. And we do have parking problems. My street is 17 feet wide, and we have 16 houses on it, and it's dead end. There's parking allowed on only one side of the street. But I don't have a car, and my housemate doesn't have a car. So we're not contributing to the problem. I'm actually sharing my driveway with my neighbor across the street who has 3 cars in his driveway and a 4th car that he parks in my driveway. So,
All right.
I'm grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for being here. All right, I'm going to, while Jason finds the next question, I'm going to take one from the internet. We got a question that is an important one. Why not short-term rentals? What are the current rules for length? I invite you all to share your comments either today or subsequently about this issue of whether these units should be allowed to be rented on a short-term basis. That was something we wrestled with, and many people say that if you allow them to be rented on a short-term basis, you really strengthen the position of the person who wants to build the unit, and that enables them to get a loan, and then therefore you get more housing. And it could be that the person who builds the unit prefers to rent it as an Airbnb, but then they sell the house 5 years later, and the next person rents it to their mother-in-law. You don't know how housing is going to be used over time. So I think there is a strong argument to allow it, but at the same time, we just felt like it was pushing against what we were trying to achieve here, which is housing for people who actually want to live in the community directly. And so that was the recommendation that I made in this zoning change. This zoning change will go to thank you for applauding that. I'm sure some other people are grimacing, but this is going to go to the council and to the committee. So there will be plenty of chance to weigh in. But otherwise, there is no. I'm not sure what the question meant, but what are the length rules? Once you, if you want to rent your house for fewer than 30 days, then that becomes a short-term rental. Otherwise, it is just a rental. And of course, as you know, anyone can rent out a room in their house, or they can rent their house if they so choose. Okay, to this side of the room. And if you'll continue to please share where you're from in the county, it's very interesting to hear.
My name is Darlene Bell Zuccarelli, and I'm from Gaithersburg. And I'm sitting back here ready to burst. Because back in 2010, when my daughter came out the Navy, I built a teeny house in my backyard for her. You guys may have remembered on December 25th, 2013, it made the local living, Channel 7 News, cover the Gaithersburg Gazette, the Rockville, all of it. It says, Mini Mac Mansion for the masses.
Can you please speak loudly and into the
Okay.
microphone?
So it said Mini Mac Mansion for the masses, 192 square feet, teeny house for my daughter.
Wow.
It has a loft, bedroom, kitchenette, bathroom, dining room, and it has a living room. Perfect, 192 square foot. It has been condemned since 2012. I have not been able to go into that teeny house on my property, even though it made all of the codes, everything was right. Richard Nelson, who was the head of housing, actually came to the teeny house. So, and it cost me and my husband $15,000 to build this teeny house. So there's a lot of information being given here, but it felt a little negative, and if I were sitting in this room, I may not have considered it. But it's doable, it's not as expensive, and it's very easy, and following the guidelines and the codes from the county. The intent was for my daughter to live in a teeny house until she started having children, and then her and I would switch houses. She could be in the big house with her children, and I would be in the teeny house to watch her. My parents lived down the street. I would have moved them into my house so we could all stay in the same neighborhood and the same community. Unfortunately, when they condemned the teeny house, my daughter moved to Virginia because she can't afford to live in this county. So don't give up. I mean, I can't go in my own house in my backyard now still, but I'm here today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to the other side of the room. Here we have in the back.
Hi, I'm Ellen Larson, and I'm from Bethesda. And we have a built attached to our house. a garage and above it a small apartment, which fits all of the requirements. Now, my question is, when I go to ask for a license, are the neighbors informed?
Okay, the question, yes, the answer is as a condition of a license, you are required to inform your neighbors. That is a part of the licensing process. So I think, does the county do it, or do we require the applicant to do it? Do you know? The county has done it.
The county does it?
But there is a notification requirement, and I don't know immediately if it's probably the county that sends a mailer would be my guess.
On the DHCA website, which has, if you search Class 3 accessory apartment license for Montgomery County, it'll come up and you'll see a checklist, and it'll also have a PDF of the application of what the process is like, and it tells you you have to put your neighbor's address abutting and that they will notify them.
So the county does the notification. Yeah. And then they have a certain amount of time to respond, and because what I'm concerned about is that it's already there, and if there's any problems from the neighbors, how could they possibly, if they be against it?
Well, like I said, like Mr. Riemer said, they're only allowed to object on certain grounds, that including parking and spacing. So they can't object to you just having an accessory dwelling unit.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Right. You can't object because you don't like it. You can only object because it doesn't meet certain standards. So as long as you meet standards, you're okay. Yes, Barry.
Barry Whitus, North White Oak Civic Association. I think it's a great idea to expand affordable housing in the county in a cost-effective way. But I totally agree with what the woman said a few minutes ago about the code enforcement. So I think to make this a more effective way of making it palatable to people who are in neighborhoods where we see, a lot of non-compliance today, is to, one, tie it to some funding mechanism that automatically increases with the number of rental units there are in the county coming out of this, and two, do a cross-jurisdictional review of the enforcement sanctions that are available for non-compliance. Look at San Francisco, because I did some research on this, because I think that's the problem. We had Tom Hucker come out to a meeting with the head of housing to talk about this issue at our Civic Association meeting last spring. And what Tom walked away from that meeting saying, the problem is that the county attorney does not have the resources, the sanction mechanisms, and we in the county don't have a reasonable mechanism for expediting non-compliance issues the way other jurisdictions like New York or San Francisco have. So I would say look at both legs of the stool.
Thank you, Barry. That's a great suggestion, and I'll make sure that when we bring this to the committee, that we review enforcement and code enforcement. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the council added, I think it was close to $1 million a year in budget for code inspectors last year. So those are still coming online. We're still hiring, I think, to get them in. But the county is embarking upon a significant expansion of code enforcement in general, and it's a big priority for the county executive. So I think we will have more resources to bear on the question in general, but I think you've raised important points, and we'll take that up at committee as well. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Dwayne Smith. I live in Down County, Silver Spring, not too far from Tacoma Park, and along where the Purple Line expansion is going to eventually be sometime in the future.
It's coming. It's coming.
Okay.
A little slower than we would like, but it's coming.
Okay, so first, thank you to you and the presenters here for arranging this, and your staff for setting everything up. We really appreciate it. I have two questions specifically. One's a compound question. The first is about parking waivers. Yeah. My question is, do you know off the top of your head about what percentage of parking request waivers are accepted? And the second part of that is there a specific reason you can give to why a waiver request would be rejected?
Okay. This is getting into, an important topic, which is what are the standards when you are applying for a waiver for parking? So who would be the best person? Lisa.
So the parking waiver, so that was just effective. Well, it's not. It's effective January, but it didn't pass in October. So how many got the waiver is actually, we haven't had any yet. But in terms of going through the hearing examiner, we have 11 that have been denied since 2013. So, about 2 a year have been denied, usually on parking grounds.
So about 2 a year of how many total? Do you have a ballpark of that?
About 240.
Awesome. That's good. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. My second question is a little bit different.
I just want to interject, though, that the restrictions in place have reduced the number of applications. So, we've had conversations about, oh, well, nothing gets denied and things like that. Well, nothing is really being applied either. So I think we're going to find out a lot more about the parking. As I understand, the hearing examiner will have a methodology that assesses the amount of available parking on the street. And then there will be grounds to approve construction of a unit without additional driveway if there is sufficient parking on the street. And that will be a matter of discussion before the hearing examiner. So
Okay.
that's basically the answer. Do I know the exact ratio? I don't know. I think they have some sort of a measure of how many spaces are available. So they actually, it's an observation from the street.
Okay, thank you very much for that. My next question, sorry, I said I had 2 questions.
Keep going, it's fine.
All right, my next question is about the owner occupancy requirement. I just last year retired from the Marine Corps. I moved to
Thank you for your service.
Montgomery County. I've been here for about a year, and I know many active duty military members who live in Montgomery County, as well as professionals in the IT field who tend to move as a part of their job career or might chase career opportunities elsewhere. With the owner occupancy requirement, if someone has to move for a better job opportunity or has to move because it's their duty, what do they do? Do they have to close down their ADU?
Unfortunately, I think that under that particular example, that might be the result. Yeah. So you're saying if someone had an ADU at their house, it was they owned the property.
Yes.
And they had an ADU, and then they needed to move, but they wanted to continue to own the house.
Yes.
Yeah, I think at
can
that
keep
point,
the
under
ADU?
this proposal, at that point, they would no longer be able to have a license for the rental. So that's a concession. You may obviously you think if you think that that's a bad idea, tell us. These are choices that. These are choices. Yeah. Well, I think you have, and you should do it again.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay, coming to this side.
Hi, my name's James Pappas. I live in the Fairland area, and I want to express a opposing point of view. So where in Montgomery County will you be able to buy a house that you know that you're not going to have an Airbnb next to you, which is a multi-international business. On the other side of you, you're going to have a duplex that comes in. And then on my street, I have 5 rental properties. So those are off the market because they're all making money off of those. And there's 5 cars parked on one side of me and 5 cars parked on the other side of me. They're rentals. I walk down the street, ask the neighbor, what are you? I'm a rental. So you're talking about affordable housing. So one of the issues is that there's so many rentals in the area that those houses don't turn over. So they're not on the market, so it doesn't make the prices go down. So if you want affordable housing, get rid of all rental units, number one. No, it's economics. If there's no market share there, if there's abundance of market on the market, the prices of houses are going to go down. That's economics. Number two.
So now saying the home prices would go down if there were more homes
on the market.
If the supply was increased. That
right.
Certainly we have many of us argue that we have a problem with the supply of housing.
No, that's not the case because the prices are too high.
But you're pointing a different way to increase
the prices
supply,
are too high because there's not enough homes. Number two. So where do I move in Montgomery County, Maryland? When I come I buy a house, I pay $700,000 or $800,000. I don't want to live next to apartments, buildings. I don't want to live next to townhouses. I don't want to live next to low-income people. Where do I move?
All right. Okay, thank you.
No, it's, I mean.
I think you're asking a rhetorical question. So.
Yeah, but that.
It's fine. It's okay.
I mean, I bought my house and there's an Airbnb next to it now. I don't have a choice to live anywhere.
Thank you for your question statement. It's fine. Many people share your perspective. Yes, Liz.
I'm Liz. I lived in downtown Silver Spring, for 24 years. I work in downtown Silver Spring and Tacoma Park. People are not moving. We've talked a lot about Tacoma Park. I wanted to speak from the real estate side of it and compare 2018 last year to 2005, which we kind of accept as the last top of the market. The prices are up 22% from 2005, which we all think of as really high sale prices. The inventory, meaning the number of homes sold in 20912 Tacoma Park, is down 32%. People cannot move. In 2005, there was bridge loans that were available. I mean, 2005 was a problem, which we saw in 2008, but you could move. There was money available to move. There is not money. You cannot buy a house in a lot of parts of this county contingent upon the sale of your own, which means you either have to sell, not knowing where you're going to go, or if you can afford the next house, or you have to be able to buy the next house without selling your first, therefore holding on to two houses until you can move. Or you stay and you call Eric and you try to make the best of your very small home. All right, so
keep the mic up.
Okay. Or you stay and call Eric, and try to make the best of your very small home. This is a really, really severe problem in areas. Silver Spring, downtown Tacoma Park is worse than Silver Spring in areas that are walkable to everything.
Thank you, Liz. All right.
Hi, I'll stand up. Hi, Eric. Hi, John. I'm an architect. I do a lot of ADUs, and I do them in Washington, D.C. They're a great thing in many levels. I see every type of family from older people. Actually, they see the ADU finish, and they decide to move into the new building, and they rent the one above. Every format you've described, I've seen it for the last 2 years. It's been an amazing change once DC zoning and DCRA cleared the rules and made very, very strict and applicable codes. They didn't reinvent the wheel. They still apply what you guys have here in Maryland, the International Building Code for ruling all building rules and the zoning rules for all the zoning regulations. One thing that I'm going to suggest that we've done in DC and we're still doing is this type of educational sessions for residents, for different counties, different neighborhoods, where a group of architects, I'm part of the DC, and I'm happy to volunteer here as well. I'm licensed in Maryland, just like Eric. We're all licensed in Virginia, Maryland, and DC, and we educate the public on, we help understand architectural and zoning rules. It's not obscure. It's 1,700 pages that we loved reading to get licensed. Don't do that unless you have sleeping problems, which I do. With that book actually helped a lot. But it was, so sessions like today, but they're very focused on educating neighbors. It's like, this is what you can, this is what you cannot do. I've been, like I said, a volunteer. In about 15 minutes, I explain about the 15 rigid rules, like, you know, somebody complained about the size of the cooking appliances. That's not in the rule book. So we clarify, we clear the waters on all that. We've met with public officials, and we continue meeting. It's an ongoing process, but it's been great to actually meet. And I hope, like, we promised lunch with Eric, and we'll probably help that. But this is an educational process, not just a ruling. I think the rules you have are very reasonable. That's what DC has, and I know because I've designed like 16 of these of every format, freestanding in the rear, basement, all kinds of stuff. The cost implications of every decision, but that's where architects come in and help residents make those decisions. Politicians, I think, like when I see this, it's like, oh, that makes sense. That also makes sense. I don't agree with everything, but they're all very reasonable and feasible. So I would encourage Montgomery County to continue this road and actually welcome people that do this type of work, architects, zoning officials, neighbors, HOA, and then it's like, this is what it is to do a build. This is how you do it. We do it every day. And, you know, we look at things like fire separations. We know how to detail a building so it's not a fire hazard. So egress is safe. That's all in the building code already. So that's why I say it's like,
thank
keep
you.
going.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, Ken.
Thank you. My name is Salim. I'm a new neighbor in Tacoma Park. In my situation, I have a young family, and we are buying a house that's bigger than what we need now, but we anticipate that we'll fill it up as our kids grow. And so, you know, we see the space as something that we want to be able to be flexible with and how we use bedrooms now versus 5-10 years from now. So I really applaud this effort, and I think you're going absolutely in the right direction. I would love for you to go further. 3 suggestions that I have. One, on the short-term rentals, a way to compromise would be to allow short-term rentals elsewhere in the unit, which currently, as I read the ADU regulation, is not allowed, even if they aren't allowed in the new ADU. So in our case, there's multiple spaces in the building. We could conceivably have one that's an Airbnb, which is limited to 130 days a year anyway in Montgomery County, and then another space that would be an ADU separately.
Well, the limit on short-term rental is if you're not there. If you remain in the house, you can continue to.
Oh, okay. That's right. A second suggestion would be to automatically waive parking requirements within a mile of Metro or future Purple Line stations. This is an obvious environmental policy. Thank you. And then a third is, and Mark, third is there are many illegal units, not in my property, but you know, we know throughout the county there's lots of these. And being very clear about an amnesty process where a homeowner is not going to get in any trouble. Even if they don't pass, they come out, they come to the county, they say, am I legal? And the county says, no, not quite. Having an amnesty where they have a couple of years to get up with code before there's any enforcement action if they voluntarily come forward, I think that would be beneficial towards getting everybody on a good legal footing. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
I just want to add to your point about the basements that are existing apartments that may not be up to code or legal. We run into that a lot as architects. We find a homeowner bought a house that has a basement apartment, and the previous homeowner was using it as an apartment, but just not legally. But it's all done nicely, and you know, they assume that the license would transfer over, and then they get stuck with this basement apartment that's illegal. So I encourage that to provide some sort of amnesty or keep it safe, keep it, you know, fire separated and all that, but maybe the ceiling height can be 6'11", or a certain waiver for 6'10" or 6'11" instead of a 7-foot ceiling height. So I appreciate that comment.
All right. It's 11:30. We'll keep going on this side.
Hi, Millie Van. I have lived in Gaithersburg for about 37 years, and I have a basement apartment. And I was it wasn't rented, we were living there with our kids. And I was planning on moving down to the basement when I accidentally fell. And so I could not move up and down that easily. So instead of moving into the basement apartment, I find I had to move out to another house that was on one level that I didn't have to move up and down that easily. But then I'm left with a basement apartment that it should be rented, and the upstairs where I was living. I haven't completely moved out upstairs. But if I move out upstairs, what would I do? I wouldn't be able to get a rental.
Okay, so you're pointing to the other, you know, again, we made some recommendations in this zoning change that many people are highlighting a concern. So you're leaving this house.
Yes.
But you would like to be able to rent it and also the basement, which is an accessory? It's completely separate and everything.
Yes, separate doors and so on. That's one.
Yeah.
The other thing is there's also a kitchenette. Because it's a walkout basement, you could use it like a patio. But inside, it's like we have the kitchenette has a microwave and so on. And
Okay, so it's
and the person who was there was saying to me, if you have this outside that you could use and you have a microwave and you have everything else, do you have to put a regular stove?
Well, in order for it to be a kitchen, it has to have a stove, and in order to install a stove, you have to get a permit, and that's how this process begins for a lot of homeowners. If that's what you're meaning.
Yes, but there's a possibility that you can use outside, because it's covered. I mean, it's sealed, and it's a walkout. It's like if you're going out here, there's a possibility where if you want to put a cooker or something, it's right there by the door. But inside the unit, it's the microwave and whatever.
Okay, so it sounds like you do not have a separate accessory dwelling unit because you do not have a full kitchen. And so if you were to create a full kitchen inside the house, then you would be then you would have created you probably would have created an accessory dwelling unit. But at the moment, it does not sound to me that you've gone that far in your construction.
Could that be rented at all?
We can. I tell you what. Why don't we follow up with you directly? Thank you.
I was wondering. My name is Bill Mooney, and live in Albany, and I actually live in a registered living unit, which some time ago we explored briefly converting it to an ADU, looking way down the road when I no longer need to live in that unit. Because my son lives in the main part of the house, and renting out the unit would be a way for him to stay in Montgomery County. So I have a couple questions I'd like clarification on. One is I wondered if you would define the term habitable space, which you're going to use as the measurement, because we didn't meet the 1,200-foot limit, but I'm not sure we meet the 50% limit. So I was wondering if you could define that. The second is the 50% limit to me seems an arbitrary number that doesn't make a lot of sense. That if you convert a full basement in a single-story house, you would be at 100%. So I think you should look at the 50% limitation. And then the third thing I'd like you to clarify, and maybe this answer will have to come later, is environmental impact studies when people apply for these. When we looked at converting, we were going to have to do an environmental impact study, and we weren't going to turn one shovel of dirt. So that was about a $10,000 requirement when I started to explore the process. And that was, I was told that by county people that I had to do that. So we dropped the issue, but so thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure what that was that the county asked you to do. If you still have a record of that, I'd be interested to see it. And as for the size restriction, the proposed change does not retain a size restriction, and it just says that the accessory dwelling unit must be less than 50% of the total new structure. So that's not. I don't know how you'd get caught up with that as a problem. Unless you're.
Just for clarification, does that mean 50% of the total square footage of the two combined?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes it much more flexible.
Correct. The real limitation there on the size under the proposal is the sizes that apply, limitations that apply to single family houses. You know, does that make sense? Well, 50%, if the basement is, the limitation is that the accessory dwelling unit has to be less than 50% of the total, including the basement. So typically your basement is going to be a little less than 50% of the house but if you had a two-story, you know, a structure that was perfectly even you know, I don't know what would happen, I guess, if you were like literally to the square foot, but yeah. Habitable space. Well, you could close off 10 feet of space as not habitable, and then at that point, you know, you're under the 50%. So, okay, Eddie.
Eddie Rivas, Potomac, Maryland. 3 quick questions. Is universal design built in, or is it ADA compliant? Universal design would make more sense for making sure that all disabilities and aging in place is taken care of. That's 1. 2, I didn't hear, does it require a separate bedroom, or can a studio be considered an ADU? And 3, what are the tax consequences? Does it add livable space, therefore increase taxes?
Great questions. I'm going to ask John to start the response.
Well, Habitat's intention would be to make the space visitable. I don't know, we could make it we are building single-family homes that are universal design, so we endorse that strategy. But I think initially it depends. I think every situation is going to be different, and you'd have to see, is it possible to make it universal design, and is it possible to make it visitable? We want it to be visitable because in a lot of cases, older adults who can't do stairs anymore, they want one level, and we want to make that available with an ADU.
But just to also answer, there's no requirement that your ADU has to be ADA compliant or fair housing compliant. It's your choice. You can choose to make it ADA compliant if you wish, but by code, you don't have to.
As far as taxes are concerned, there's probably someone here who can explain this with fewer bumbles than I might make, but once you do an amount of work on your property that has a certain value, then you may be reassessed. So who can answer it more precisely than that? That's good enough, I think. So yeah, I mean, if your home is now more valuable, then your home is more valuable. Okay, we have a question from the internet. What about tiny houses on wheels? That is a great question that I was actually wondering myself. I mean, you know, I guess you'd have, it's this, you don't have to anchor your house in the ground, do you? You do have to anchor your house in the ground. Okay.
I would recommend that it would be anchored down. We have high winds here and other things. However, there is an accessory code that says if it's an accessory structure under 200 square feet, the building permit process is more of a site plan review. They don't actually review drawings and details. But I would imagine if someone's living there, that rule might need to be adjusted. So a living unit under 200 square feet should probably be anchored. Correct, yeah.
Yep. Okay, this side of the room.
My name's Harry Fall. I have a very simple question. The zoning text amendment that you propose limits the ADU to 2 adults. Right. It mentions nothing of children. 10 kids.
Correct.
Right.
There's no limit on children. You may have as many children as you wish. Right. I always get nervous when people say I have a very simple question. It's like, that always like, uh-oh, here it comes. This is the one I've been waiting for. Yeah, you may have as many children as you wish, but they must be your children. Actually, unfortunately, there are some cases where that will become a problem. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep talking for a minute here, but I just wanted to explain that there are no easy answers sometimes, and the limitation on 2 adults, you know. Anyway, let's just keep going. All right.
Okay, I'm Steve Crawford. I live with my wife here.
in Durwood, which is between Gaithersburg and Rockville. And first, let me add to what the others have said, that this is really a wonderful demonstration of thoughtful democracy in action. And at this time in our country, that's wonderful to see. Two, I support, I think, in general, with some of the good ideas that have emerged here, what you're proposing, but I also agree with the folks that say it's very important to enforce the existing code and to enforce it energetically. Three, I just want to ask, you said that homeowners associations could have stricter requirements, and my concern is this all an exercise in futility because most of them will? Do we have any experience to give us a sense of the likelihood of that?
It's a good question.
Okay,
so homeowners associations are allowed to have stricter requirements. They may not violate fair housing laws, but they may not have restrictive covenants that violate civil rights and fair housing laws, but they can adopt more strict rules. That is applied, for example, with short-term rentals. A condo association can decide that it does not allow short-term rentals in the condo building, for example. Do we know? Cannot be banned. Right. There are certain things that, I guess I didn't know that, but there are certain things you're saying that homeowners associations are not allowed to prevent. Thank you. Did that answer your question? You're interested to know what's the impact of this. That's a good question. I don't know if we know. Do we have any way of really having an answer to what that would be? Well, they can be, yeah. It's our interpretation that HOAs are allowed to be more restrictive in this issue. But all right.
Okay, I live downtown in the Bethesda area, so I just want to say on the parking, my question is about something else. On the parking issue, I hope a good idea like this doesn't get waylaid because there's a huge parking problem in down county, Montgomery County. But my question, I don't fully understand, I'm new to all this, I don't fully understand the rule about what percent of the property has to be the ADU. There was the 50%, but then there's not the 50%. I can easily envision an ADU being a viable apartment that's not as much as 50%.
No, it doesn't have to be 50%.
So what
it just cannot be more than 50%.
It can be less than 50%.
It must be less than 50%.
Must be less. Okay.
Thank you. You make a good comment about parking, and it's there is a as homeowners, and I certainly experienced this when I moved into my first home that I had as a homeowner. I felt that I owned the street parking in front of my house, and it was an outrage if I ever couldn't park in front of my house. I didn't even really know that didn't come with the deed. So that's just kind of homeowner culture. All right, here.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Cronin. I'm with a nonprofit called Coalition for Smarter Growth, and we're very excited about this proposal. Ileana is one of our wonderful volunteer architects, where we've actually moved beyond the reform of kind of all those major regulatory barriers like the off-street parking and a bunch of other things, and really streamline it so that make it a matter of right process for the homeowner to build a basement apartment or a backyard cottage or garage conversion. So we really want to encourage everyone to keep with it, and it would be great if you could contact me. We actually have created a listserv in DC to deal with DC's building codes, which will be slightly different than Montgomery County's building codes. And so I actually would suggest and encourage people, if you want to talk to me, to basically create a listserv where people can get together, share their experience, share their resources, move this legislation, and then get into the business of streamlining the process and making it as easy and straightforward and understandable as possible for all the homeowners and everybody else involved. So
Excellent.
I'm at Cheryl, CHERYL, at smartergrowth.net. And I have some flyers out front with my organization, Coalition for Smarter Growth. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Cheryl Court. We really appreciate what the Coalition for Smarter Growth does in this county. You really help keep our eyes on the ball with smart growth. All right. There's flyers for any group that wanted to bring them out front to this side.
Hello, I'm Karita Osborne.
You'll please keep the mic close.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. I'm Karita Osborne, and I live in Potomac, and I'm in the midst of applying for an ADU in my lower level. And the people that you're involved with are delightful. They're wonderful, but the process has stagnated for me because one of the requirements is that you have to have all permits satisfied, and record keeping is not always perfect, and some of the contractors who are fully licensed and active and competent in 1999 or 2001, actually I think some of them was 1996, we can't find how they were the permits were not satisfied. So in order for me to proceed, I have to satisfy them. And so the contractors are not in business. They've died, they've moved, and no one in the county seems to know how I can get them satisfied. And so I've had an extension like twice to get a license. And to answer your question about letting the people know, they give you a sign that's about 4 feet by 4 feet that you have to display for about 60 days. That's how you let people know. You don't get letters. They don't think they send letters. They didn't in my case. They didn't send letters to the neighbors. You just have to put that sign up.
Yeah, that sign is actually not going to be
yeah.
Is used as often in the future.
Well, it's what I had to do.
Yeah, it's what you had to do. It's the older process, but the newer process.
But my question is, how do I get around satisfying the permits that were not satisfied?
Well, you don't get around it. How do you demonstrate you've satisfied the permits, right?
Yeah.
We'll have to, I think, Department of Permitting Services. Yeah, Ken, my chief of staff, is going to give you his card, and we'll see if we can help you solve that problem. All right. Who do we have next?
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Len Shensney. I don't live in Tacoma Park.
Okay. Let's have some applause. All right.
Although I did until 2 months ago.
Oh.
I lived there for 30 years, and I had an ADU in my house. It was there when I bought the house. And what I wanted to do is, based on my experiences, note a few misperceptions that might result from things that have been said here.
Please keep the mic close.
Okay, sorry. I could hear me, but anyway, my apologies. One was that I was actually helped in buying my house in the first place because of the apartment. When I tried to sell my house, I was told that's no longer a relevant issue. The banks basically don't care.
They didn't attribute any extra value to it. Is that what you mean?
They said no. They would not give a mortgage. They would not value the mortgage, set the mortgage amount to the purchaser, the person who was buying my house. Have it influenced in any way by the fact that there was an ADU in the house. That did not matter. Okay. Another thing that's been said is that the ADUs would help give more living space for people in the county, to make it short. Frankly, I don't know how valid that is. On my street, I have had the one licensed apartment. There are at least 3 other apartments, ADUs, if you want to call them that, on my street that weren't licensed, but there were people living in them. So there are an awful lot of people living in the county in apartments that aren't licensed, I would say, to apply that general point. And finally, the assertion that this would be affordable housing. My apartment was about a mile from the Tacoma Park metro station. I was renting it for $1,100 a month. I understand that I could have rented it for $1,400 a month. It was a very small apartment. It had its own bedroom, and it had been recently renovated. However, I don't think I could call that affordable by the terms that you guys use.
Thank you.
And finally, to follow up on an earlier question, we're still trying to find out what livable space is.
Okay.
Habitable, sorry.
Habitable space. Habitable space is habitable space. It's, you know, an unconverted attic is not considered habitable, right? It's up to code. There's 7-foot ceiling height is an example of a requirement that makes it habitable, heated. Someone's saying heated. I wanted to just respond on something. The way I describe this housing is more affordable, right? I'm not saying, because when you say this is affordable housing, everyone has a different impression of what you mean. But the reason why this is more affordable housing is because it's smaller, typically. An accessory dwelling unit is smaller than a house, and so therefore it costs less than a house. It is on the same property as another house. That's going to have some impact on how much it costs if you're sharing a property with another person. You know, those kinds of things tend to constrain the cost of the housing. So it is more affordable housing. Is it, you know, is it housing that anyone can afford on any income level? Not necessarily, but it is a more affordable way to be able to live than, for example, buying or renting a house. All right. Did I answer all your questions? Okay, I think so, yeah.
Hi. Thanks for hosting this. I live in Chevy Chase View, and
Yes.
we have great public transit. So I've got a 6-car parking pad for my 1 car. I would love to be able to use some of that space for an ADU. I am a little bit concerned about, I'm curious about the setback requirements, whether the setbacks are according to the rules for the principal residence or the rules for an accessory structure, because, you know, on one hand, the accessory structure has a 20-foot height that might be problematic. The rules for the principal residence, however, 25 feet from the back of the lot could be problematic. So I feel like, you know, we're trying to encourage more family-sized units. It seems like some of those rules could work against being able to get more 1- and 2-bedroom units versus studios. The other concern is I'd like to have it big enough that eventually maybe I could move into that space once two of my kids go off to college, for instance. But what happens if I have an 18-year-old who chooses to take a gap year, or a kid wants to move back after college? You know, it seems like that should be a flexibility we have, and it doesn't seem that's written in here.
What do you mean? How is that?
Oh, well, just in terms of having a cap on 2 adults in the ADU, being able to move into that unit and rent the principal residence.
I see. So if you and your spouse lived in the unit, then your adult child could not move back into that unit with you.
So that was a concern that seems like it could be addressed. And then also, what is the role of municipalities? Obviously, homeowners associations can put restrictions. What about small municipalities?
All right. Most of the municipalities have their own zoning, not all, but most of them do. So that can just depend on municipality by municipality. Eric.
I can talk about setbacks. So we do follow the accessory structure setbacks. So it's the principal house, it depends on which zone you're in, but 8 to 12 feet away from the side property line. You can go up to 5 feet with an accessory structure. You're not limited in size. It's just the longer, I think it's 24 feet. If you have one dimension of your accessory structure that breaks 24 feet, I think for every foot over that, you have to move a foot away from the setback. So if you want to do a 30 by 30 structure, you got to be an extra 5 feet. So maybe you're a 10-foot setback. And so it prevents, you know, big, tall houses from looking down on your neighbors, kind of moves it away. In terms of height, it's 20-foot max height, but it's 15 feet to the mean height between the roof and the eave. So there, you could do a box, like a flat roof, and have it right at 20 feet, or you could kind of slope it with some dormers. And they allow dormers to, up, as long as they're less than 50% of the roof area, you can pop some dormers in it for more ceiling height inside. But again, as you go higher than 15 feet, you have to move your median. You have to move it further away from the property. So if you do one of these flat box roofs, they want that to be further away from the property as well. It's just basically to keep you from hovering over your neighbor's backyard. It's a little complicated, but anyway, hopefully that answers your question.
One thing I wanted to add is that under our proposal, looking at Ken here, if you have a previous existing structure, that's grandfathered in. But if it's a new structure, then the current rules apply.
Yes, something new in this CTA would be that if you have an accessory structure that was built before 2012, then we'll waive the setback requirements. So if you have your house was built in the 20s and you have a garage that's right on the lot line that's detached, you could convert that unit into an ADU. But if you're building any kind of new construction, you're going to have to observe the setbacks in the code.
So, Sean, tell us more about it. Maybe write and follow up and consider issues there. All right, guys, we're almost out of time. It's 11:55. Oh, yes, you had the mic, please.
Thank you.
Okay. She was ahead of you, I promise.
I promise I won't take long. I grew up in Tacoma Park. I was not able to buy a house in Tacoma Park because I was priced out. And so I had to move outside. And so now I live in Down County, Silver Spring, 3 blocks from where a new Purple Line station is at some point going to come in. And so in order to continue to allow for, young families, young professionals to not be pushed out further and further away from transit, and to be able to make sure that economic development, which is an important driver and an important talking point around the value of the Purple Line, right? So that others, not just big businesses and corporations who can build larger apartment buildings and things like that, so that average people are also able to benefit from economic development and thrive and flourish, and to be able to continue to stay in that space as the property values go up, as taxes go up. I live in a place where on my street and in my neighborhood, maybe 1 in 10 at the most houses has a driveway, period. And if they do, it can only account for 1 car. And so those are grounds by which somebody could legitimately, even if we decided to build an ADU in the basement, right, we wouldn't be able to do it because of the very small lot sizes as a separate house. Those are parking spaces is a legitimate grounds on which somebody, a neighbor could object, right, and could deny. We'd have to apply for a waiver. And so, I really appreciate what you're trying to do here, and I appreciate that in large portions of the county, the parking requirements, the modifications as they're written would be reasonable. In neighborhoods like mine, they're not reasonable. Yeah. And so there needs to be some, I appreciate that there's a waiver process, but the code needs to be written in such a way that it is inclusive and not just, allows for waivers, but acknowledges that this is a large county with very different living situations and very different density situations. And so to continue to allow folks to stay here, and so we don't have to move to PG County, like a lot of my friends do because they can afford houses there, to be able to stay in Montgomery County and continue to have young professionals and young families, it's important that the code be written with allowances that allow for the different situations in different parts of the county, so that as the Purple Line comes in, I don't have to move elsewhere and to be able to stay there. And so being able to stay in my home and add an ADU with all of the parking situation as it is, I won't go into that. We can spend all day talking about parking frustrations on streets. But, that is an important, it's an important thing to think about for the long-term development and, reducing gentrification, people being pushed out as communities rise in prosperity. And so I would encourage you to consider something like, an exemption for a mile within or something like that of the parking requirements, so that it can be inclusive, not just waivers.
Thank you for saying that. One of the things we learned was that the county's building code, changed. I don't know how many years ago, 25 years ago, when 2 spaces were required with a new house. So older, probably actually a lot longer ago than that, but a lot of the older neighborhoods were allowed to be, houses were allowed to go up without a driveway. And I agree that we don't want those neighborhoods to essentially be ineligible for ADUs. And it's a challenge in this. So thank you for recommending a different approach for transit proximate housing, and we'll have to take a look at that. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, everybody, for coming out on a weekend, and thank you for letting me speak because I think we've run out of time. What I've observed today is that I think by having approved units, it actually may provide better oversight for the county as well as a quality of life for the communities that will be impacted. And as the woman just did say, Montgomery County is a huge county and a lot of downtown places, I'm hearing a lot of that. And I live out in Olney. And we don't really have bus service, so I don't think it's really going to be the same. And also homeowners associations. What my question is regarding the number of ADUs, has the county decided that, or have some oversight on the impact, how many ADUs could be within, say, a certain community or zip code so as not to overwhelm any given community? So that's my question.
Right. That is an interesting question. When I think about what the potential is here, ultimately, I think I don't actually know how many ADUs are going to get built over time, right? Now we're creating 40, 50 a year. I would hope that we'll see quite an increase as a result, but there are about 375,000 housing units in the county. I don't think ever more than a small fraction are going to have an ADU. So I don't know that it's going to really make a material difference in terms of fundamental questions about where people live and things like that. But we will take your question and consider that and as we do the deliberation. I'm running out of steam, folks, so thank you very much for attending and participating. There is a public hearing coming up, and we urge you to come. Coming to this event is good. Coming to the public hearing is even better. So please come participate at the council. Thank you so much and have a great day. Drive safe.